Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors at Coramdeo Church, and I'm here with Pastor Jon. What's up, Pastor Jon?
I'm doing well, Rusten.
Doing good?
It's Monday.
It is Monday. See, you got your guitar out behind you. You've been jamming on that thing?
Well, I had to make some room in my closet for stuff that was moving around. I actually sold one of my broken down amps this weekend, and so I had to
Oh, you did?
out. Yeah.
Which one?
It was an old Fender. It was like an early 90s solid state that quit working, and I was thinking about doing one of those custom build like tube amp things and putting it in there, but I'm like, I've got too much stuff to do. So I put it on Craigslist, and the guy who bought it is actually using it for that. He's just going to tear out the amp section, and he's going to do a Fender Deluxe.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, custom build.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. So we are starting today a new chunk of sermons to go over because we just started Advent. But Before we dive into talking about Advent and one of the first sermons on Advent, we got to touch on something else first. What's that?
First of all, like and share the video. That's how you can kind of show us some love for taking this time to share our bourbon preferences and theological banter. So like and share. And then the other thing is we got to introduce our drinks. So do you want to go first? Want me to go first?
Well, I'll go first.
Okay, you go first.
I have got a classic. And I'm running towards the end of my collection of stuff, and I can't recall if I've done this before. We're gonna start hitting some repeats and just have some like new tasting notes on the same old whiskey, but at some point. But I'm doing Woodford Reserve.
Ooh, that's good.
I don't think I've done this one yet, but
I don't think you have either. That's a good bourbon.
Yeah, I was introduced to this bourbon because a music artist I loved. I asked he mentioned at some point on stage how much he likes brown liquor, and I said, "What brown liquor?" And he said, "Well, Los Cazadores and Woodford Reserve." And I was like, "I don't like tequila, so I guess I'll go try some."
I don't like tequila either. Every time I say that, people are like, "Well, you haven't had good tequila." I was like, "I've spent some time in Mexico, and I've had what people consider good tequila. I just don't like it."
Yeah, to me, this is gonna sound funny, but tequila reminds me too much of early adolescence. Because when I was
there's some history there
for some weird reasons. Okay, it's not what you think. When I was in early adolescence, 13, 14, 15, I had an like every kid during that time, you have some acne you deal with, right? And there was this stuff that somebody recommended to put on my face. It's called witch hazel. It's basically like rubbing alcohol with some other I don't know, some other like aloe type stuff in it, but it smelled like tequila. And I didn't know what tequila was at that point.
Tells you a lot about tequila. That's all you need to know. It's it's basically overpriced pimple cream.
So basically when the first time I smelled tequila, I was like, whoa, it smells like that witch hazel I used to rub on my acne 14-year-old skin. So yeah, that's appetizing.
Yeah. Wow.
So what you got, Jon?
Okay, I'm throwing you a curveball. I'm gonna do 2 drinks.
Triple shot something.
Yeah, this is from the confront, which we both know and love, and it's a lumberjack. And so a shout out to all the people who watch us in Kids app. Go to the Coffee Oasis. I love coffee, like strong coffee. This is the lumberjack is like a maple syrup breve, but you got to get some extra shots in it. This tastes like waffles in coffee. It's incredible. So I got this. This is a shameless plug for the confront.
Nice.
And then the other thing I'm drinking is
the classic.
And see, there's just a little bit left in there, but I have another full bottle on the shelf. So Lagavulin 16, which is probably my top
favorite scotch.
Yeah, probably top two, 3 drinks ever.
It's rich. It's got a syrupy kind of thing going on. It's peaty. It's a classic.
It's beautiful.
This is also like this hits the caramel note like loudly, but it also has a lot of depth to it in terms of like I don't know, just richness on your mouth.
Yeah.
My buddy, I wonder if I have it in here. No, I don't. It's probably near my bed. I have this little coaster from my buddy Matt Knopfsiger. Matt, if you're watching, thanks. Thanks for going to Kentucky without me and enjoying the tours of Woodford Reserve. But he brought me this coaster, and it's like the bourbon taste wheel. It's cut out of actual oak that they use for aging the barrels, and it serves as my nightstand coaster since I drink tea and before I go to bed and read.
We all know you don't drink tea before you go to bed.
It's one of the many things. I mean, I'm pretty Catholic in my beverage consumption.
Oh man,
that's good.
Yeah, you just gotta like take a little moment.
I'm really enjoying this Woodford Reserve too.
Man, we do have a video to shoot here, but this is really good stuff.
Oh yeah, speaking of video. Okay, so we are as we're recording this, we've already walked through the first 2 weeks of Advent.
Yep.
And so we got to talk about week one. Well, let's first talk about Advent and how the different ways we have approached Advent as a church, and in terms of our kind of rhythm of preaching, and I want to talk about, like, maybe some people who have been with coramdeo long enough know the rhythm, but maybe they don't. But when I talked to you first about it, I thought, I like this rhythm. So can you kind of share what the rhythm is this year and kind of what it's been in the past?
Yeah, so I'll do those in reverse order.
Yeah.
If you're a pastor, if you're a preaching pastor, and you're leading a church through Christmas, there's kind of this like, okay, how are we going to do it this year? And then you don't want to be repetitive. And then, so you kind of get stuck in this, you got to like reinvent things every year. And so after doing that for a while, it was just like, this is really crazy and exhausting. And so we came up with a plan, like a rotation. So every year there's one of like 3 things that we will do, and we switch them out. So for one Advent season, we'll take the stories right out of the gospel. So in one year we'll do Matthew. So last year that's what we did. We looked at the first 2 chapters of Matthew. And then in another year we'll do the same thing, but we'll look at like Luke. And then we will go through the Advent themes: hope, love, joy, peace, like we're doing this year. And then the other thing that we've done is we've looked at the songs of Advent. So there is a rich history of Christmas carols that, interestingly enough, you just hear on the radio. If you go to a mall, you go to a store, you're hearing these songs, and these songs have such rich Christology in them. Yeah. And so what we do is we kind of look at the songs and the lyrics, and we go back to Scripture, and we're kind of helping people understand where does this come from. And so it's just a couple different ways to get at the same thing, but it's fun because you're talking, when we do songs, we talk about the history of the song and who wrote it and what was the context of writing it. And then it makes you hear the songs, differently. And then it's good to just go back through the Gospels and then the Advent theme. So that's kind of our cycle. We go through that. It's a 4-year cycle. And it just takes the guesswork out of it. We just keep going through it. And it doesn't get old because they're 4 years apart. So
yes. Well, we're in the, I think this is the second time through for me, I think, the themes. So hope, love, joy, and peace.
Yep.
And so the first Sunday was hope.
Hope.
Yeah. So my first question to you about Advent and hope in particular is, Advent kind of feels like it hits you a little differently this year, wouldn't you say?
Like Advent is always countercultural, and the dissonance this year is just cranked, because you think about, like, if you turn on the news, which I don't advise you to do, but if you do turn on the news, you watch it, you're not walking away from that or social media with a sense of hope.
Yeah.
The church literally is the only people in the world right now who are talking about hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything else is utter hopelessness. And so that there's a huge distinction, and it's costly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
When you talk about hope, people misunderstand it. You get called all sorts of of stuff.
Yeah.
But, Jesus said something about having tribulation in the world. So,
Yeah.
so it's okay. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about high demand, short supply, and the church has the only story that allows you to look at everything that's going on and have any sense of hope.
Yeah. How do you think that, as we were preparing for Advent season, I can remember several conversations with you and talking about how much the hope of Advent is needed right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that our need for hope is more clear because our need for hope is always present.
Yeah.
Right? But our need for hope is more clear when we are walking through the valley, as it were, or walking through darkness, or having the rug pulled out from under us, right?
Yeah.
And it feels that I mean, this year has been incredibly disorienting in terms of how much the rug has been pulled out from under us.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this at one point in several episodes ago, kind of like C.S. Lewis's like the problem of pain thing,
Mm-hmm.
and how God, whispers in our pleasures and shouts and shouts at us in our pain. And I think this has been a shout, more of a shout kind of a year.
Yeah, for sure.
But can you talk about? I mean, you had lots of conversations with me leading up to this season about how we need Advent, and how looking forward to Advent, and how Advent's going to hit us a little differently this year. And can you just talk about, to kind of dig a little more deeper into what you're kind of thinking and getting at with that?
Yeah. So people who are alive right now are walking through what is, for the vast majority of them, at least in North America, an unprecedented experience. There we go, using the word again, unprecedented. Nobody's ever been through this. And so there's multiple layers to it. It's not simple. One of the things that's going on is a pandemic.
Yeah.
And most of us have never lived through a pandemic. That thing's real. People do get sick. People do die. People do die. That's a real thing. But then there's also a number of things that have been thrown into play as a result of the way our elected officials have managed or mismanaged the problem. Mm-hmm. So lockdowns and shutting down of states and closing schools and calling certain people essential and other people non-essential, and saying you can't get together to celebrate, you can't feast, you can't go out to the bar with your friends. All of these things together create a bit of a perfect storm. So you have a new sickness that is introduced, and then you have a lot of people who have lost their ability to work. And there's all sorts of things that are associated with that. A sense of value, a sense of meaning, a sense of satisfaction comes from working. By the way, you pay your bills by your job. If you're a family, you are paying rent, or you're paying a mortgage, and you're paying for food. You're doing all of this stuff. And when an elected official who makes $180,000 a year gets to keep making that, but tells you you can't make yours, and you have to live with that, and the schools are shut down, that, I mean, it just absolutely is wrecking people. I think it was in June, there was a survey that showed that 1 of every 4 Americans seriously contemplated suicide. And that number is just astronomically high.
Yeah.
So, and then every day, what are you hearing? You're hearing death, death, death. And
there's no news like bad news. Bad news travels fast.
And then there's, there's a lot of, I think, legitimate questions about how this is being handled. And that doesn't mean that you're, denying the reality of COVID, but seriously questioning the constitutionality of things and the way this is clearly being politicized and used as a political weapon. And then if you ask those questions publicly, you won't get a debate about data. You will get, your character will be attacked. You don't love grandma. You don't believe in science. You don't, whatever. And so all this stuff, and I shared some personal stories. Like, you can hear this and always think it's theoretical or someone out there. But I'm like, I have friends that own businesses.
Mm-hmm.
This comes from a locally owned business that does great work in our community. And when your occupancy is shut down to 25%, just do the math. Your income is shut down to 25%. And then what do you have to do to your employees? It's like, you can't do it. And then, I got another friend who owns a restaurant that has been passed down through the family, and they're told, a barber shop, and you got people who work there, and they can't work and they can't provide for their, it's just, it's the perfect storm. And all of that is on top of COVID. It's all on top of, the sickness that's going on. And so there is just a pervasive hopelessness. And I would say it's not that a hopelessness has been introduced. It's a hopelessness has been exposed, because so many of the things that are normal that give us hope have been taken from ordinary people, and it's just a disaster.
It's interesting, because when you think about what is hope, I mean, we're kind of talking about hope as a kind of condition, a kind of feeling, as it were, or a kind of mindset, right, or a heart set or something. And hope really has, it's that, but it's also, it's a contingent on something outside of the feeling, right? Like like J. Gresham Machen wrote a whole book called What is Faith? And I think it's very similar to this concept that I'm thinking about right now with, what is hope? And one of the things that he said is like, faith is really all by itself is nothing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hope, similarly, all by itself is nothing, right? Yep. Hope and faith both are conditions that latch onto something to put hope into, right?
Yep.
Something that we put our faith in, right? Yep. And they're only as good as those things that you rest in, faith or hope in. And I feel like right now, this is, kind of getting back to what you're saying. Right now, it seems like we're being trained to put our hope in the state. Like,
really?
because here, this is what I mean. Like, I think that me and you share a lot of the frustration around the response to the virus, but neither you or I deny the reality of the virus, right?
Yeah.
And the reality that it I think that it is wreaking havoc on a particular subset of people. I at the same time, I'm very, very, very thankful that it's not as bad as people thought it was, based on the original models were absolutely and empirically false and wrong. And yet somehow the same mindset around the original models carries into today in terms of the response. It's weird. Like the models in the very beginning that predicted, some 2 million people in the first how many ever months we're gonna die from this, and that's just categorically false. And I think that if that were true, there'd be different kinds of responses. But the current state of things is like it's bad, but it's not as bad as we thought it was. And yet we're still being told that the only solution is for some people to be forced out of their livelihood. And the only reason we would ever say that is if we believed and hoped in the state to save us.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't tell your neighbor, no, you have to make no money. your children need to starve and all these things for the sake of this percentage of people that are going to die. The only reason you would ever say that is if you believed and you had hope that the state could step in and save them, right?
Right.
And so,
just to clarify, the guidelines and the mandates that the governor has handed down has stripped people of their ability to provide for themselves.
yes, it has. Like,
it's not like some theoretical like.
well, that's not a false narrative. Don't fact check that and tell me that that's wrong, right? People lost jobs. Businesses have gone under. And the only reason you could ever feel like, oh, that's, they're going to be fine is if you believed that it would, one, that the state will take care of them, and two, it's the right thing for the state to take care of them.
Or three,
yeah,
they don't matter.
Or yeah, three, they don't matter, yeah. But just kind of interesting because that's kind of the way that people think about people who are critical of the responses. They think that if you're critical of the response, you think that all these people don't matter. And one option says, we shouldn't no, they do matter. Let's find ways to protect them, right? And that'd be like, I don't know, in terms of COVID, the Barrington Declaration kind of avenue, right?
Yeah.
And side benefits of that is you don't have to put your whole government and legacy of freedom and at risk to do that. The legacy of freedom that hundreds of thousands of people died to protect and preserve.
Right.
So you don't have to. You do if you do the one without the other. The Barrington side in America seems like it respects that. It would respect that, while at the same time it's not trying to treat those people as though they're expendable, but think of new creative ways to protect the at risk.
Yeah.
And then the flip side, the other side says, no, I don't know, what's like, that's too hard or something like that, or the idea of isolating the most vulnerable is a fool's errand, or it's not just to those people because they're being singled out as, I don't know, vulnerable. Well, and instead, let's just shut everything down and to slow the spread of this thing. And behind that's also a fear of it, because there's still a level of ignorance as to what the virus does long term. That's kind of like underneath a lot of that. But at the back end of that, there's this idea that we can do this, and we can do this together, but only because the state can step in and help.
There is a level of insanity,
I
believe, to all of it. I'm sure we'll get in trouble for saying that, but there's a level of insanity to this, and the insanity is that the left wants to say people should have the right to end their life when they want it, how they want to, right? Mm-hmm. And then we'll say, we have to destroy your business to protect these people. And it's like, if I think we could do things to protect the elderly, and that is predominantly the people who are at high risk. The vast majority of people are not in a high risk category of this. So could we take steps to help inform and protect those who are high risk while not destroying the lives and livelihoods and businesses of everybody else? And then if somebody who's high risk wants to take the risk, okay. What are we going to say to that?
I mean, it's kind of like you have, if you go and look at the excess deaths that the CDC is reporting, you see that there's like a huge number this year of excess deaths, more deaths than normal, being attributed to Alzheimer's and dementia patients. Something to the tune of 75,000 excess in that particular category.
Yeah.
that's a byproduct. I think it's unavoidable to say it, but that's a byproduct of the lockdowns, and it's interesting because they're the ones that are highest at risk. But don't you think that the people who are highest at risk but have the least amount of time to live should also be able to choose with what they want to do?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not even, we're not saying that they should be able to choose death, because choosing to see your family is not choosing death ever.
No,
if the byproduct, if the byproduct of that risk is death, I mean, ask yourself, like, if there's a risk for you to be in your family, a risk that you don't actually know the outcome of, right? To stay with your family or not ever see them again, and potentially die or not die, like potentially die if you do see them, which one are you gonna do? It's like, I would die. I'd die for my family. So,
well, and families are actually best equipped to protect and care for those who are high risk.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to put grandma in danger.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna do that. But anyways.
We
digress. So hope.
I mean, and maybe we were just demonstrating a little bit of the fact that we need a hope that goes beyond our own abilities, right?
Yeah.
With this whole conversation, right? So how does hope speak into this kind of the craziness of these things in particular?
So let me say something, and then we can maybe unpack it together.
Sure. Okay.
Hope is all about eschatology.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
It's all about eschatology, and that's a big word that usually gives people hives because they think of people floating in the air and unmanned airplanes and numbers and all this stuff. But that's not the heart of biblical eschatology. Eschatology is about it's about the future. It's about where is the story going? What do we expect? What are we anticipating? And that's obviously based on the scriptures. It's based on past history. So like in the sermon, I talked about hope is about, the certainty of good things in the future based on past realities. But hope is really oriented about where are things going? Where is the story going? And that is a question that the church is the only people that have any sort of attractive answer to. Because if you're an atheist, a secularist, a humanist, whatever, your answer is the story is going to annihilation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the inevitable end. Like if it's a closed system, if it's just the stuff that exists, the energy, it eventually is going to run out. We don't know when, but it will run out, and everything will just be empty forever. That's the story. Yeah. And the Bible gives us a very different story. It's a story of a renewed world, of a new creation, of a world where Christ rules with his people, and there is no sin, and there's no death, and there's no sorrow, and there's no disease, and there's no lockdowns, and there's no war, and there's no racism, and there's no injustice. It is a perfect world. It is the world as it was in Genesis 1 through 2, completed. Everything as God intends. And that sounds crazy, except for the birth of Christ. Yeah. Right? That's where we look back and go, why would we believe in a perfect world, a world which is healed? Was it Sally Lloyd Jones in her Jesus Storybook Bible? It's a world where all the sad things become untrue.
Yes. I love that way of saying it.
Why do we have that hope? We have that hope because of the birth of Christ. God himself came to this world, born of the Virgin Mary, born in the manger, lived his life, suffered, died, rose again. That's why we believe the future is glorious.
Yes.
The immediate future may be difficult and dark. The ultimate future is void of all darkness. It is void of all suffering. It is void of all loneliness and isolation. It it is a perfect world, a healed world in creation.
And you have the down payment, as it were, with Christ, and so you know he's going to make good on the rest, right?
Yeah, the resurrection is like, he has the power to do this.
Yes.
Who could possibly renew everything? Well, one who defeated death.
Yes.
One who defeated death.
What's amazing to me is how you have this amazing, hopeful reality that has broken into the world in the incarnation of Christ and his life and death and resurrection, and it defangs and disarms everything that could possibly put you in a state of fear. Like Hebrews talks about how in his death and resurrection he destroyed him who had the power of the fear of death.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who had the power to enslave those who are enslaved by the fear of death. But your hope is based in something that's happened behind you, and it's sure because of that for what's to come. And yet we are told to live in the in-between time, or we have to live in the in-between time, and we live with people as people of hope.
Yeah.
And hope is not a docile thing. It's not a passive thing. Hope shows up in how you live and how you work and how you parent your kids and how you live in the world and what you decide to do or not do, right? Yeah. Hope has legs, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of one of the questions when because I hear a lot of people talk about hope like it's kind of this thing that because I know what's coming, I can live my life now as though nothing matters. You know what I mean? Like they would never say that.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's kind of what ends up happening.
And it's not well thought out because that's more consistent with annihilationism.
Exactly. But really what hope does is it frees you to look at risk differently.
Yes.
Right? And
the risk assessment is a little different.
The risk assessment becomes completely different. That's why people in the first century, were, living as Christians, even if it cost them absolutely everything.
They were not intimidated by the threats of Rome.
They were not intimidated by the threats of Rome or the threats of death. One of my favorite stories is Polycarp. Polycarp's probably was a disciple of John.
Yeah.
Same John who wrote the gospel. And, he's one of those guys that refused. He refused to pinch the incense to the emperor. Such an easy thing to
pinch the incense.
So easy. Just do it. It's just a little bit. It's just a little bit of incense, right? That's all you got to do, right?
And God will forgive you, right?
Yeah. And not only that, he had all the people around him saying, we do this because it's the best thing for our culture and our society, right? This is what binds us together, right? Stability, right? It was considered a kind of sacrifice for the sake of the stability and the health of the nation, as it were. And the Christians were just like, well, we don't believe in that king and that God, so sorry, we're not going to do it. And Polycarp refused. They took Polycarp into the stadium to basically have him eaten by lions or something like that. And the emperor so kindly says, all you have to do is say, something like, I recant and down with the infidels, or something like that, right? Yeah. And instead of saying I recant and down with the infidels, and all the people are watching him in the stadium, first he says, how could I possibly turn my back on my Lord, who has cared for me and provided for me for over, I don't know how many years it was, like 50 years or something like that. Like, he's like, why would I ever turn my back on him? Like, that was the answer in the midst of this thing. He's already, he's loved me, he's cared for me, he's, done everything for me. Why would I ever turn my back on him? And then he points his finger and goes around the crowd and says, down with the infidels. He points to all the people in the stadium, and then they killed him. There's a radical hope there, and it's funny because that hope is also what really shuts down the whole Marx, religion is the opiate of the people thing too, right?
I'm sorry. I'm giggling out loud because I can just see these young evangelicals pleading with Polycarp. Nobody's going to respect our religion if you do this. This is not going to read well. You're going to make us all look like a bunch of fundamentalists, and
yes,
you're not loving your neighbor because now
and you're really willing to. They wouldn't say it was for the sake of truth. They'd say you're going to do that for the sake of not putting a little bit of incense on fire.
Yeah.
I don't think that Polycarp thought that if I did that, I was doing a worshiping act to the emperor. I don't think that, think about it. How many Christians thought, oh, in my heart, I'm worshiping Caesar if I put this little bit of incense in the altar, right? Yeah. It'd be the easiest, lip service to do, right? It'd be the easiest, but it wasn't because they were at risk of having a truly idolatrous heart in terms of worshiping the emperor. It was because truth was on the line.
Right.
It was about truth. Who is God?
Yeah.
Who is he? And this act says that this emperor is Lord and Christ is Lord. So it's not true. We're losing truth here, right?
Yeah. One of the things that came to mind when we were talking is, and this gets to the heart of hope and specifically for Christians.
Yeah.
Is that there is a inordinate level of fear around this thing. And we both watched that the address of that guy in Canada. Was it in Toronto?
Oh yeah, Joseph Boot.
Yeah.
Go watch Joseph Boot at the protest in Toronto.
Was it Ontario or Toronto?
I thought it was Toronto.
Okay.
But look it up and prove it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. He just had a couple one-liners in there where it's like, how is it that people who believe in the resurrection are so captivated by a fear of death?
Yeah.
Like and I guess I'm not suggesting that a Christian should not be concerned with virus. But there's a difference between being concerned and having an inordinate level of fear where this thing controls your life. Like I'd be driving down the road and seeing people in a car by themselves wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Going, what is going on? Like, yeah, be wise, don't be smart, but don't be a slave to fear. Don't live as if death is ultimate or this life is all that you have.
Yeah.
It's that's a pastoral concern.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure.
You're talking about the world's going to be made new, and so nothing matters, and that's the complete opposite of what the Apostle Paul.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes.
I think we did this in a previous episode, but the end of 1 Corinthians 15, right? Where he says, the sting of death and the power of sin is the law. Thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work.
Yes.
And it's like, Paul didn't think that the resurrection and the future coming of Christ meant that work didn't matter. It was the exact opposite. He says, no, it does matter.
Yeah.
It's the only way what we do makes any difference is if this is all going towards some future that is something other than just obliteration and death.
Yes, exactly. Yep. I know, and there's a whole, the hope is anchored in what's gone before us, but it also is anchored in who God is and shown himself to be.
Right.
It's one of those, I mean, man, we could have a whole conversation all about this, but there's a fine line between, somebody who's just like, God's in control, so I'm not gonna pay attention to the speed limit. I'm not going to wear a seatbelt. You know, like I'm not even going to open my eyes. And versus, you know, God's in control, and I'm going to do absolutely everything. I'm not going to leave my, you know, a person who's afraid to leave their house. You know, what's that called? An agoraphobic? I don't know. One of the phobias, right? You know, what do you say to that person, right?
Yeah.
Or what about somebody who's already a germaphobe, right? Who is already struggling with that? How are they ever going to recover after this year, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was right. See, you know. So, you know, there's what's, and that's where wisdom really comes in, right? What does it look like to live? You know, what does it look like to live with hope, not recklessly?
Yep.
And yet not so fearful of real risk that you don't ever do what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And you don't also become a slave. That's important too, because
Absolutely.
fear of death makes you a slave. It makes you a slave in the sinful, in considering sin, but also it really has the potential to make you slave in all kinds of different ways. You know, one of the passages that I've thought about a lot this year is where Paul tells his people that he's talking about, hey, if you were a slave when you became, you know, came to Christ, know that you really are free. Although, so live like a free man, even though you're a slave. But do try to avail yourself of freedom if you can. Like, try to actually avail yourself of getting out of under bondage and your debt, right? Because that's where slavery really happened in those days. Make every effort to avail yourself of not being a slave anymore. And then he says, and to those who are not slaves, he says, do not submit to the yoke of slavery, for you were bought with a price.
Yeah.
The act of being purchased by Christ puts in us a condition that says we should not submit ourselves to slavery ever willingly, right? And so there's certain risks, and this is one of the things that I'm concerned with. Like, the virus is real, but the way that the narrative is going forward is slavery, or slavery is our only option.
Right.
Trusting the state, you know, and financial debt is our only option. And that's where I do not agree with the narrative. You know, like, I'm not dismissing the COVID thing as real, but and I want to walk in hope that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And walk in hope, meaning I want to walk faithfully, and I think that means protecting those and actually giving people the you know, speaking truthfully about what's going on, but protecting those who are vulnerable, finding ways to help and love our neighbors who are vulnerable, but, you know, not also crushing everybody under the weight of servitude and debt, right?
Yeah.
So, but I do think that hope leads to action in that regard. It leads to I'm thinking about action in terms of, you know, it messes with our fears, and it should give us both the antidote to our fears, but also it should allow us to be able to see and walk in wisdom. And I think that's where I with that distinction of who cares, slam on the gas, recklessness, and afraid and never going to leave the house, let's become slaves. There's something in the middle there that we should be walking towards. And I think you have to take into account, what has God told you to do, right? That's never off the table. What God has told you to do, he's never given you a commandment that he doesn't also supply what's needed in order to do so, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, how are you careful careful with the risks in the meantime? But that has to come down to, what has God said, and let's not ever forsake that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, you know, the text that I preached on from Hope was maybe a little unexpected, but it was Titus chapter 2. And there's a part where it talks about the grace that appeared, and then there's the future glory of the appearing of Christ. But in between there, in verse 12, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about here is self-control. Self-control is not negligence. It's not, whatever, I'm going to do whatever I want. And I don't really know anybody who's a proponent of that right in this current situation. Yeah. But self-control is also self-control from the tyranny of fear.
Yeah.
So there, like what you're talking about is this, like, no, we're not, we shouldn't just ignore real risk. We shouldn't be, what's the word I'm looking for? We shouldn't be reckless in our decisions. We should be self-controlled. We should be wise, but we also need to be, and this is what I'm, the side of the equation I'm more concerned about is we should be self-controlled in, especially as it pertains to the issue of fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't let fear control you.
Yes.
And right now I feel like that's the battlefront.
Yeah.
And I feel like we do need to acknowledge that it's going to be different based on somebody's, based on their context. There are situations, there are places in our country where this is worse and places where it's not. And so you have to employ wisdom.
Yeah.
But no Christian has any reason to be consumed by fear.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to be fearful. And that's not because this is getting blown out of proportion. It's not because the state's going to come in and make everything okay. It's because Christ was born, died, rose again, and is coming to make all things new.
Amen.
So have that hope, and the fruit of that hope is going to be wisdom and self-control.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's a good word, I think, to end on.
Cool.
We'll be talking next week about the love, which is the second theme of Advent. But in the meantime, John, it was awesome talking with you. We're glad you guys joined us for this episode of Sermon B-Sides. Trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor.
Amen.
Amen.
See you guys next time.
Next time.